Also wanted to thank the organisers and also the sponsors for today. As you can tell from my title, I'm a recent convert to the Formula One Championship, and anybody that's seen the Netflix series will know that it provides a background to the industry and an overview of the strategy and all the behind-the-scenes workings. So I wanted to give a similar account of what happens in the mining industry, particularly as it relates to critical minerals. So I've divided my talk into two parts. The first part really is just a light-hearted look at the parallels between the Formula One Championship and the critical minerals industry. As we know, they're both highly dynamic, competitive and innovative. In the second part, I then propose to have a look at some of the things that SRKs continue to ask for in undertaking a due diligence or a technical review by both financiers, by independent experts, by potential takeover parties as well. So in the hope that this might enable potential explorers or developers to see how that they can progress and drive towards production. So just as the driver is a key determinant of success on race day, geology is the ultimate driver of project success longer term. In particular, the rock type determines the key physical and chemical characteristics, including the form, whether it's a sedimentary, igneous, brine or clay-hosted deposit, the mineralogy, the final products that can actually be produced, including whether it's actual metals or whether we're talking about a carbonate or some other chemical, and also obviously the waste products that are derived from that production profile. In addition, the depth, geometry and orientation that determines how we're actually going to mine this and the likely cost structure. The ore complexity and the intertwining of different chemical species, how we're going to separate those will determine recovery, processing costs and also processing methods, whilst the location and remoteness will determine the infrastructure, transportation costs and also have influence on the legal, social, environmental aspects associated with the project. In terms of engineering, whilst the chassis design, the engineers are trying to keep down minimum weight, design the aerodynamics, drag, and ultimately leading to increased speed, so too project engineers are trying to find the optimal settings for project throughput, value, safety. So whilst the engineering principles for a critical minerals project aren't significantly different from those that are associated with more traditional mining methods, we do see that there's a greater propensity for different or new age non-invasive techniques such as in situ leach for uranium, rare earths and lithium. We're also seeing that in order to be able to meet the objectives required to meet the metals demand going forward, there's a greater desire to move towards mass mining techniques, which means greater depths that are also required. And this presents significant technical and operational challenges. In terms of processing, this is the engine that drives the successful outcomes. As in a car, we're trying to determine whether we're wanting acceleration or straight line speed. A key consideration from a processing perspective is how we're trying to position ourselves on the value curve, whether it's an upstream position or a downstream position. Given the focus on novel flow sheets or complex flow sheets associated with critical minerals, this area is also of particular interest to financiers, given the impact on potential recoveries, costs of production, and ultimately the price able to be achieved for the product. Also of note is the fact that many critical minerals are unlike traditional markets in that there is no established benchmark pricing, and pricing is determined by customer-specific requirements based on a tailored end use. I'll comment on that a little bit further. In terms of the tyres, where the rubber really hits the road in terms of interactions between the project and the broader community, I've broken this up into four main categories, that being tailings, waste, and these are obviously key to community and stakeholder engagements, and obviously areas for potential conflict. By way of example, lithium byproducts often include magnesium or calcium byproducts or waste, which is not, there's no widely known remediation process in place. Infrastructure, the remoteness and the access to market, obviously has implications for the broader community and other end users of such infrastructure. In terms of ESG, there are three main critical areas that people are assessing, these being carbon emissions, land use changes, and any contamination. We've also seen recently the rise of calls for differential pricing, particularly in regards to nickel, around ESG type matters. And of course, there's then the services, in particular around water use and for the access to cheap power. And this also has implications for project-on-project risk assessment. Financing. Financing is the fuel that drives and lubricates the industry. Structuring of a financial outcome is important, as it may represent a potential constraint to future development scenarios, so you have to get it right from the outset. As I mentioned a moment ago, financiers are particularly interested in this aspect as well. In particular, they're trying to understand the risk-reward trade-off. They're also trying to understand how the project is put together from the outset in light of a particularly poor historical track record of production, as well as their own internal ESG requirements from credit committees. Governments are particularly receptive to investments into critical minerals at the moment. And as such, there are several financial options that are available which aren't particularly available to other traditional markets. And these would include measures under the Inflation Reduction Act and other green loans, bonds, tax breaks and other incentives. But please remember that no financing agreements are ever binding until customer specifications have been met. In light of time, I'm going to skip over this slide, but obviously teamwork is a key aspect both to both the Formula One industry as well as obviously critical minerals and the search for them. Conditions. Just as prevailing track conditions impact operating strategy and race outcomes, economic and regulatory conditions impact on the delivery of critical minerals, both near and longer term. This has led to a high degree of political jousting and jostling amongst nations and project proponents. The themes are often interwoven between these, but they include nationalism, export restrictions, particularly in around lithium, nickel, rare earths and bauxite, as well as economic coercion, with a specific aim of moving up the value chain. As we've seen over the past 6 to 12 months, there have been particular bumps in the roads with respect to both demand and pricing for electric vehicles and for renewable energy sources. Another one that I'm going to skip over today, but I'm happy to talk to you further about, is obviously a competitive spirit, which is key in an industry such as Formula One, but also in critical minerals. In terms of both industries, where there's lots of money, there's power, politics, innovation and glitz. It means that there's plenty of actors and critics that are sitting on the sidelines, commenting and providing input as to how projects should be developed. SRK is often in a unique position in this regard, in that we are often entitled to take a look under the hood, acting as in terms of due diligence or technical reviews. So in the second part of this talk, I'm going to focus on some of the observations that we've been asked to take a look at. SRK is particularly well qualified in this regard, having completed over 30,000 projects over a 50-year time frame. We have over 17,000 technical consultants operating out of 40 offices worldwide and spanning 20 countries and 6 continents. We cover the full mining life cycle and across a range of commodities. As we've heard from a number of speakers today, there are 2 opposing themes. One is the overall permit approval process, which I think we all agree is taking far too long at plus 15 years and needs to be brought down if we are to meet the supply challenge for critical minerals going forward. To the counterpoint though, as a reviewer of many projects and the proponents' timelines that have been put forward, we would often argue that these are very aggressive and they require a degree of scepticism and reality check. In the West, certainly better outcomes require all actors to be involved, from government through the community, through the industry, as well as academia. In terms of confidence, we find that mining is particularly good at scale, efficiencies, and cost reduction, but we're not particularly good at unlocking complex ore bodies, nor are we particularly good at social and environmental complexities, particularly those required in order to support the energy transition or to engage with stakeholders. From an Australian perspective, we are typically pretty good at hard rock type deposits, but we have, with limited exposure to other deposit styles such as clays and brines and other extraction techniques such as RKEF and in situ leach, we need new skill sets to hand. This goes to the competence of our consultants and those that are reviewing projects worldwide. In order to tackle this, we rely on our colleagues, or SRK relies on its colleagues outside of Australia, particularly those out of North and South America, Europe and Asia, to assist in some of the regards to these more, or to these different styles of mineralisation to what we're typically seeing in Australia. Increasingly, we're also seeing a challenging and competitive labour market, with skills shortages arising from the older generation, us grey-haired old men retiring, coupled with a reluctance from the younger generations to take up the challenge. And that's obviously having an impact on the sector more broadly, but specifically to critical minerals going forward and our ability to deliver on some of the forecasts. As I mentioned earlier, critical minerals markets are different to traditional markets. They're typically very niche and small in size, and they operate with restrictive acceptance parameters. This requires practitioners to look at the requirements not only of the processing plant or the refinery, but also the waste minerals that are being produced, and these need to be identified early. The approach that we typically adopt is one akin to the industrial minerals rather than towards the traditional metals, where we start with the customer specifications and work back through the mineral chain, through the ore reserves and back to the resource. Often we find that there's too much focus that's placed on the grade versus refined value relationship, and less to the refined value versus the cost of getting to that point. Processing is also a key to financing, as I mentioned earlier. In particular, financiers want to understand that there is a commercially proven opportunity which requires pre-qualification and pilot testing along the way, staging of the risk assessment in order to demonstrate to financiers that this is a viable opportunity for them. They're also wanting to understand some of the mitigants to project overruns and ramp-up issues. They're wanting to understand project-on-project risk, such as for nickel projects, such as coal providing energy to some of the nickel developments. As there's no standardised products, there's no rules of thumb. And strategic alignment is also a key, particularly in terms of offtake partners, investors and other supply chains. ESG is also another important risk assessment, and it's heavily scrutinised by investors, financiers and regulators. It's important to ensure that on-ground practices don't contravene ethical or publicly acceptable practice. We're seeing numerous standards existing. In fact, there's more than 90 ESG standards that apply to mining. We are seeing, however, improvement led by reputational risk, ESG investor ratings and financial penalties in the form of withdrawals of investment, leading to change in the industry. A lot of the data supporting ESG can be accumulated as part of the exploration project or at minimal cost thereafter. However, we do note that in general, once the project has reached a PFS stage, that we're moving from identification more to mitigation of risks. And that requires collaboration not only with geoscientists, but also with specialists in the ESG space. So in summary, the critical minerals space is a highly competitive, dynamic environment, characterised by technical, project and market risks. Some of the key focus areas that developers and explorers can work on is around investing in high quality people, demonstrating a pathway to production by staging of risks, ensuring strategic alignment with the value chain, and understanding the ESG parameters that you're operating within. I look forward to September here in Singapore. Thank you.